It's safe to say that evil versions of Sonic are always a blast. Whether it's the edgy coolness of Shadow or the chaotic energy that Scourge brings to the table, seeing what if Sonic was bad never seems to get old. But there's one particular twist on the blue blur that I honestly haven't explored much in Archie, and that's Metal Sonic. So today, let's fix that by diving into every single version of our metallic Sonic that we would see throughout the Archie Sonic comics. However, I want to be clear that we're going to be focusing on robot Sonics and not Sonic who is a robot. That's to say, we're not going to be looking at roboticized Sonic, that's a video for another time. Now to start us off, our first ever metallic Sonic doppelganger isn't actually what you might expect, as it's an Archie original. Frustrated by his constant failure, Robotnik uses his knowledge of Sonic to create Pseudo Sonic. This is the earliest robotic double of the blue blur, and surprisingly, Pseudo Sonic is packed with personality, which is pretty fun as robots seem to often be lacking that. The story kicks off with Sonic out of commission after a run-in with Poison Sumac, leaving him disgustingly swollen in a scene that just makes me really uncomfortable. While Sonic recovers while talking to a talking butterfly, Pseudo Sonic manages to fool Antoine into letting him into Freedom Fighters HQ, and while he might look the part to Antoine, everybody else figures out pretty quickly that Pseudo Sonic is, well, not really Sonic. So Pseudo Sonic's downfall comes pretty quickly, and it comes from, well, an unexpected weakness for a robot, as he gets killed by static electricity. Tails manages to fry the bot, using his tails which he seems to rub together while running. I'm not totally sure what's happening here, to be honest with you. But Pseudo Sonic is defeated before he can do any real damage, and the story wraps up with Pseudo Sonic dumped in the trash, and in a really goofy moment that feels really like early Archie Sonic, Pseudo Sonic breaks the fourth wall and urges the readers to write to Archie Comics for his return. However, it's pretty safe to say that not many people did this, as Pseudo Sonic would never be seen again. Now, perhaps the reason why we never got a sequel to Pseudo Sonic is because Robotnik intercepted letters sent to Archie Sonic Comics through the US Postal Service. Canonically, this is actually how Amy would be introduced to Archie, and like early Archie is just such a wild ride of randomness. Unsurprisingly, Robotnik would use this moment to kidnap Amy, and in a twist, Tails would be sent out to scout out Robotnik's new factory. Now, predictably, Tails is immediately captured by SWAT and this leaves Sonic to save the day once again. This leads to Sonic being sent to a strange zone. It's the Stardust Speedway zone, which is very clearly based on Sonic CD's Stardust Speedway. Here is where Sonic has his first encounter with Metal Sonic, or rather in this case it's Mecha Sonic. Yeah, this was really early in Archie, and naming mistakes happened pretty often where Mecha was used instead of Metal. Mecha Sonic was surprisingly chatty compared to his video game counterpart, and it's kind of fun. I'm actually not sure if I prefer him like this or not. Ultimately though, Mecha proved to be no match for Sonic's Figure 8 Super Peel Out, which pushed Mecha to his limits, and ultimately he would lose his legs before then being destroyed. Sonic would save both Amy and Tails, and unlike Pseudo Sonic, Mecha didn't need fan mail to ensure his return, as this would be a fan favorite right off the bat. Much later, Sonic and his friends would find themselves visiting a carnival. While exploring the Hall of Mirrors, a bright light would trap them inside of the mirrors, revealing that, unsurprisingly, Robotnik is behind all of this, and he's been working with the clearly evil rat who runs the carnival. Fortunately though, Knuckles is not a fan of fun, and so he was not hanging out with people inside of the Hall of Mirrors, and thus was not sucked inside of it. So, while investigating the surroundings and trying to figure out what to do now that everybody has been captured by Eggman, Knuckles crosses paths individually with each of the members of the Chaotix, and together they introduce him to the Power Gem. It's this mysterious artifact that is definitely not a Chaos Emerald. Armed with this gem, the newly formed Chaotix would storm the carnival to try and save Sonic and his friends. Once there, however, they would come face to face with the new and improved Mecha Sonic. Despite Mecha's upgrades though, he is unceremoniously blown up by one of Knuckles' new friends, who just happens to be a literal sentient bomb. You can't even blame Archie for this one, as the bomb comes straight from the Chaotix games. But Mecha doesn't go down easily. In true dramatic fashion, he suddenly transforms into Titan Mecha Sonic, who is a character I just find so cool but is so sadly underutilized. Not to be outdone though, Knuckles taps into the power of the Power Gem, and he inexplicably just grows to equally giant size. So the two giants would then duke it out, and of course Knuckles would win, with the day being saved. It's worth noting that Titan Metal Sonic would show up one more time, though this time he is completely unrelated to Mecha Sonic, and instead he's just a weapon that's dropped off by the Death Egg onto the Mobian City. I actually really love how incredibly powerful this behemoth is, but sadly, like his previous version, Titan Metal Sonic was just too good for this world, and he was quickly taken care of. though this time it's due to magic from Ixis Nagus, which crystallizes him and uses him as a weapon against Eggman. One day, while searching for Tails in the forest, Sonic would encounter yet another upgraded mecha. No, wait, hold on, this is actually where they changed it to Metal. It's here that it's revealed that all of the Metal/Mecha Sonics up to date are actually the same robot, and they've been continuously rebuilt and upgraded off of the same parts. This latest version is far more dangerous than ever, and he's equipped with a grappling gun arm, a chest laser, and all of this would be thanks to the aforementioned power gem that he now has inside of him, though the growth power from the gem would never be seen. This iteration of Metal Sonic was a full-blown psychopath. We learned that he ended up kidnapping Tails and stashed him atop Mount Mobius. This is less of a mountain and more of just an active volcano, and it's on the verge of erupting. Sonic has exactly 5 minutes to rescue his friend before the volcano blows, with Metal Sonic hoping that it will end up killing both Sonic and Tails as Sonic tries to rescue his friend. Adding to the chaos, Metal Sonic gleefully announces that he's going to make Sonic's climb even harder, but he refuses to give any explanation as to how. Now, naturally, you might think that there'd be like some badniks he'd have to fight, a broken bridge, booby traps, that kind of stuff. What you probably wouldn't expect is for Metal Sonic himself to just show up midway through the race and then sucker punch Sonic out of nowhere, which honestly got such a laugh out of me. I don't know what it says about me, but like the absurdity is just so ridiculous. As the clock would tick down, Sonic would find himself still so far from his goal, and Tails would be trapped with lava steadily rising towards him. Things are looking pretty grim. Thankfully, Metal Sonic's Sucker Punch only slowed down Sonic for a moment. With time running out, Sonic manages to power through his climb, only slightly slowed down by a net trap, so I guess there were some booby traps aside from being punched. And despite setbacks, Sonic manages to reach crazy high levels of speed and rushes in just in time. In a surprise turn of events, as Sonic saves Tails, Metal Sonic breaks free from Robotnik's programming and he develops a mind of his own. In a shocking act of redemption, Metal ends up sacrificing himself by holding back the erupting volcano and buys Sonic and Tails just enough time to escape. Tragically, this newly self-aware and redeemed Metal Sonic would be consumed by the lava, only to be destroyed and never seen again. Or was he? Well, let's put a pin in that for now, as I have other Metal Sonics to look at. The loss of Metal/Mecha Sonic would prompt Eggman to create a third version of Sonic's robotic nemesis. This one would be much closer to the Metal Sonics we would see in the video games, and while this new Metal Sonic sometimes had the ability to talk, he would be far less expressive than anything we had seen prior. So his personality was dialed way down from the more chatty previous version that we had seen develop. Over time, he'd end up not talking at all, and to be honest with you, I'm not sure which version I prefer, because there is a part of me that does enjoy the more chatty and obnoxious Metal Sonic, as he seems to parallel Sonic a little bit better, but the ominous silence that comes from Metal Sonic is just a lot of fun as well. However, the biggest thing that sets this Metal Sonic apart is that he is a blank slate. Unlike his predecessor, who was essentially just the same robot built and rebuilt over and over again, this version marks a fresh start without any of that self-realization that the previous had. Now, to be honest with you, I don't want to dwell super long on this version of Metal Sonic, as he's fairly generic and his stories are mostly just, here's a bad guy. There aren't really any crazy standout qualities that I find throughout him, and for the most part, whenever Metal Sonic appears from this point forward, it's this third iteration. Unless I say otherwise, it's gonna be this more generic one. So let's go over some just more notable moments, with the first one being when Metal Sonic would appear during Scourge and his crew's hostile takeover of the Freedom HQ. Metal Sonic would square off against Scourge, and what's kind of interesting here is that although he talks, it isn't actually him who's speaking. Instead, Eggman controls him remotely using Metal as his mouthpiece. Now, during this fight, we would be introduced to a new variation of Metal Sonic, this being Metal Scourge. He's a robotic counterpart to this villain who, honestly, I just adore his design. We do not get enough Metal Scourge, as he is disappointingly quickly taken out by the Suppression Squad. Now, overall, Metal Scourge and Metal Sonic in general kind of feel like the fast fashion versions of Metal Sonic from Eggman. He's quickly rebuilt, don't get me wrong, this guy regularly shows up, but he's also really quickly destroyed, and so it kind of becomes less of an interesting character and much more of just a run-of-the-mill badnik who might be a little bit stronger. Now, shortly after he and Metal Scourge's defeat, we would see Metal Sonic yet again, and this one I feel is worth mentioning just because he talks this time, but what's really interesting is that his speech is completely different, and the dialogue actually feels like a clear homage to HK-47 from Knights of the Old Republic, where he prompts an emotion before delivering his lines. which I don't know who that reference is for, but as somebody who grew up on the KOTOR games, I gotta say I was actually kind of digging reading Metal Sonic's dialogue with HK's dry, sardonic tone. It's a really fun touch. But unfortunately, this encounter with a slightly more chatty Metal ends with him being teleported away, and he would be sidelined yet again. The next time we'd see him, he wouldn't be talking like this anymore, which is a real shame because I do think that this is actually a pretty decent medium between overly chatty and overly silent. Now, one of my favorite moments of this version of Metal Sonic was his new role in the Metal series, where he teamed up with Metal Tails, Metal Knuckles, Metal Amy, and this group was led by the imposing Mecha Sally. And honestly, this aesthetic between all of them is just such top-tier design. I love it so much. This point in Archie honestly brought some really banger design characters. Seeing them all together is such a visual treat, and it's an absolute crime that we didn't get to see more of them working together, as they just caused absolute havoc and destruction. Tragically, Metal Sonic's most impactful act came from an assault on Sonic and his friends. In a devastating move, Metal Sonic would self-destruct at the order of Eggman, and he would take down Antoine with him. This explosion left Antoine critically injured and in a coma for the remainder of the pre-Genesis Wave era. It's honestly a really heartbreaking moment. You can tell that the art here went all out. And honestly, it's one of my all-time favorite parts of the series. I talked about this a lot in my Bunny Rabbit video, but man, does it just ever hit so hard. Though, here's something to think about. If Eggman was able to churn out these metals so quickly, isn't it safe to wonder what if there was an army of these fast fashion metals? Now, while most versions of Metal Sonic are fiercely loyal to Eggman, there's something intriguing about the ones who aren't. One of the more fascinating concepts in this vein is the Metal Sonic Troopers. They are a group of 100 Metal Sonics who, in a shocking twist, were antagonistic against Eggman, and they threatened to take his life right off the bat from the moment they were introduced. Interestingly, these troopers don't just go after Eggman, but they also assault Knothole, and the reason for this is that they've been taken over by Eggman's AI son, Adam. Now, Adam, I've gotta say, is a whole can of worms, and I don't want to dive into that today because it's a lot to talk about an AI son. Now, in an unexpected twist, we would learn that the Metal Sonic Troopers were actually created by Sonic's uncle Charles, which is kind of interesting. Now, during the time that Sonic was lost in space, his uncle would create 100 of these Metal Sonics to serve as guardians in the shape of Sonic, as they assumed Sonic was dead. Now, Charles, of course, never imagined that his creation of 100 super soldier robots would be hijacked by an evil robot son and turned against everyone. This leaves him honestly horrified by the consequences that his actions have had. He feels responsible for this chaos, and we get some pretty decent dialogue between him and Rotor as Rotor helps reassure him. However, as it turns out, the Metal Troopers are really more about quantity than they are about quality, as they follow that whole fast fashion idea I talked about before. These guys are shockingly pretty easy to defeat, and we end up with the majority of them defeated by Shadow raising his hand. Now, to be fair, he did more than just raise his hand, as he ended up doing Chaos Control inadvertently on them, but again, story for another time. It's a real shame that we didn't end up seeing more of the Metal Troopers outside of this arc, because honestly, I really like the idea of, one, a whole bunch of Metal Sonics, and I kind of like the idea of the Freedom Fighters taking Eggman's tech and using it against him. It's something that we don't really explore a ton of, and it's something that just seems so fascinating. Now, we would actually get to see a bit more of this in just a second. So the question of how Charles built the Metal Sonics is a fascinating one, and we would actually get an answer almost 100 issues later in an issue that would also cover yet another story of Eggman's tech being used against him. Enter Shard the Metal Sonic. This is the Metal Sonic who ended up meeting his fiery end way back in the lava after having some self-actualization. But against all odds, this Metal Sonic, or rather Shard, would return with an updated look. Not only has Charles been able to rebuild Shard, but he's also been able to create the Metal Sonic Troopers based on that data. Charles is responsible for giving Shard a second chance on life, and Shard is fully intending on repaying the favor by being as good as he can. However, to be honest, this is less of a second chance on life and more of like a third or fourth chance at this point. However, the important thing is that Shard is not the villain he once was, and he actually seems disappointed in his past self and the actions that he took. After all of this, he is ready to turn a new page on life, as he is ready to follow the path of redemption. Shard is placed into a top secret group, which includes a mix of characters you've probably never heard of, such as Larry Lynx, and we also have Silver, so at least there's someone familiar to pull readers in. Shard himself is actually a ton of fun, and it's a real shame that we don't get to see much of him. He's quippy and talkative, he channels a lot of that kind of classic Sonic energy with just a dash of a little bit of arrogance. I really enjoy it. It becomes really apparent in a moment where he's fighting off against a new Metal Sonic, and Shard not only defeats this Metal Sonic, but he delivers this super fun line where he goes, "No imitations accepted." I really would have loved seeing more of Shard, and I'd love to see him go toe-to-toe with Eggman. It would be so good for redemption. Together with this new ragtag group, Shard would be off on top secret missions, but unfortunately, like so many others, his time would be cut short. Now, as I've mentioned before in previous videos, I have a very soft spot for redemption arcs, and Shard's is one of the coolest. There's a lot of potential in his character, and that's what makes it all the more tragic that his story just came to such an abrupt end. Shard was one of the many casualties of the Super Genesis wave, which honestly you've probably heard me talk about ad nauseum at this point, and I think it's really unfair that he was one of the casualties here. It's really frustrating because in my view, Metal Sonic's legacy shouldn't be tied to Ken Penders, as this character was wholly unique from anything that Ken had done. But whatever, that's a whole story for another time. Interestingly though, Shard wasn't totally dead, as his character would live on post-Genesis wave. However, he wouldn't live on as a Metal Sonic and would rather live on through the form of Gemerl. Now, Gemerl to me has always felt like a spiritual successor to Shard in the Archie comics. The version of this character has sparked some pretty decisive opinions among fans, and personally, I'm a really big fan of Gemerl like this. He's chatty and he's a fun little robot guy. He brings a lot of charm, and it's stuff that's pretty reminiscent of Shard. But I can also understand why some fans might feel let down, as he isn't as quite robotic as he is in his video game counterpart, and I can see why the creators made him more robotic in the IDW reboot to make him match his video game self. However, I really enjoy the banter that he has with Metal Sonic in these Archie stories. It really feels like Shard is still with us. Now, with all of that out of the way, you might think that we're finished, but we've still got more robotic Sonic variants to cover. And we're going to start off with one of the most iconic. This is Silver Sonic. While Metal Sonic has always been close to Sonic in terms of speed and power, Silver Sonic is massive in design, and he is specifically built for destruction. Unfortunately, this first iteration of Silver Sonic, despite looking really cool, wasn't immune to electricity, and after getting zapped by some faulty wiring, he was sent packing. In a fun twist though, Sonic would end up using the Silver Sonic suit and piloting it like some kind of mech, a Mecha Sonic, you might say, as he fought against Robotnik. It's kind of cute, and it's a little bit on the nose when they start putting words like Hulk and the Thing in bold, but I enjoy it. In the end, Robotnik would be defeated, and Sonic along with Tails would manage to escape using Silver Sonic as a shield in the mid-air. Now, if you haven't caught on yet, it's clear that Silver Sonic was heavily inspired by Mecha Sonic from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. But since Mecha Sonic was already taken as a name in Archie, they had to pivot, and they ended up taking on the name Silver Sonic. Fun fact though, I can't even call this robot Silver for short, like how I call Metal Sonic Metal for short, since there's also a character named Silver in the Sonic universe, so you know, it's just fun, complicated times. Now, a very new version of Silver Sonic would appear inside of a test tube. This time, he would sport a design that very closely resembled the Mecha Sonic we would see inside of Sonic Adventure, and I absolutely adore this look. Now, as a kid, I spent a ton of time with my brother trying to figure out how to unlock Mecha Sonic in Sonic Adventure, because if you don't know, he's just a character that shows up there that serves zero plot relevance. You don't get to play as him, you don't get to play against him, he never even leaves his tube. And so it was so cool to see him utilized in Archie. After the gang ends up saving Station Square from chaos, Silver Sonic would make his appearance. Much like the original Metal Sonic, he would speak, and he actually has a bit of attitude, which is fun to see. Although I do actually think that in a weird twist, I prefer a silent and threatening Silver Sonic over a more chatty one. Now, not only does he have attitude though, but he also fires missiles, and he's genuinely a really formidable opponent, with superpowers such as flight and laser eyes. Unlike his previous iteration, this version of Silver Sonic, known as Silver Sonic 2, was much more resilient. He could shrug off a collapsing building, and according to Nicole, he even had an infinite power supply. Despite all of this and his new abilities, Sonic would eventually manage to decapitate Silver Sonic, but it isn't the end of Silver Sonic 2. Adding insult to injury to Eggman, he would be reprogrammed to attack Eggman on sight and hunt him down. Funnily enough though, this would lead to a series of events that would introduce us to Shadow the Hedgehog. After Silver Sonic forces Eggman to flee, he ends up tumbling down a hole on Prison Island, and shortly after this, a mysterious caper begins, and I've gotta say, I really like Archie's use of the word caper. It's such a fun word, we don't say it enough in our day-to-day life. This heist would be pulled off by none other than Shadow, and Silver Sonic would be the one to show up on the scene to duke it out with Shadow. Unfortunately though, during their battle, Silver Sonic is decapitated once again, and this time there would be no return for Silver Sonic 2. Now, while it's really hard to leave behind such an iconic design as Silver Sonic 2, we would end up returning once more to the original Silver Sonic, the day that Sonic and Sally infiltrated the Death Egg. This third iteration of Silver Sonic is so much closer to his original design, and honestly, I love how psyched Sonic is when he sees him. He's just so ready to fight him. Now, while I have a soft spot for the adventure-inspired Silver Sonic, this classic version just hits differently. His razor-sharp spines that he uses for a spin dash and clear superior strength just make him such a fun foe for Sonic. Also, I'm a really big fan of the big, strong, and demeaning, quiet character that he is. However, this fight would lead to tragedy. Silver Sonic would manage to separate Sonic from Sally, who would find herself face to face with a wall-mounted turret. Gunshots would be heard, and Sally's goggles would be found shattered on the ground. Sally is no more, and on top of that, Eggman won in a major way, as he would manage to wipe the entire universe and rebuild it in his own image. But that, of course, is a story that I've already covered in my Mecha Sally video. To make a long story short, Sonic would manage to rewind time, and using his newfound time, he would end up saving Sally, but things would only get worse from here. Both Metal Sonic and Silver Sonic would team up against Sonic as Sonic fought off against Eggman, who had a gun. Meanwhile, Sally would search for a way to stop Eggman's latest plan, which was to roboticize the world. The only solution that she would be able to do in time would be to reverse the blast onto herself. Doing this would destroy the Death Egg, and along it would destroy Silver and Metal Sonic. But through this, Mecha Sally would be born in that process. Before we close off, I want to give a big thank you to our first ever channel member, Epic Gamer Swag 420. What a name that is, I absolutely love it. If you want your name read at the end of the video, you can subscribe as well for only $2 a month. And with that, we've reached the end of all of the Metal Sonics that at least I could think of for this video. Now, I hope you enjoyed it, and one day I am planning on taking the time to cover the times that Sonic has been roboticized, but dedicating all this time to his mechanical doubles seemed well worth the exploration, and honestly, it's surprising how just lengthy and kind of confusing it can get. And even though it's a little bit surprising to see just how much Metal Sonic showed up throughout Archie, there is a part of me that isn't the least bit surprised, as everything seems to be a little bit drawn out and overly complicated in Archie. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I want to thank you for watching it all the way through. If you feel like it deserved it, a like, a comment, a subscribe, they really go a long way. But at the end of the day, I am not your boss, and I just hope you have a good one.